Okay, hi. Welcome to SMP's Tech Intelligence. This month we are talking about cybersecurity insurance. For those of you who are familiar with SMP, we offer infrastructure, collaboration, digital workspace solutions, security, cloud, and services. This particular webinar is going to focus on security and in particular cybersecurity insurance. And for this session, we have a guest speaker, Reggie DeJean from Western New York-based Lolly Insurance. So with that, I will hand it over to Reggie.
Okay, so what is cyber liability and what does the policy cover? We will review this ever-changing landscape and show how insurance policy can be part of your protection that you need for your business. While the policy can't make it like things never happen, there are several advantages to having an insurance policy as part of your cybersecurity program. So, which shows the data. So let's one more slide if you could, please. Sorry about that. So let's start by looking at what a data breach is. So the first block will show you, what can be an inconvenience from a person or from generally your customers, and that includes personal identifiable information, protected health information. This can also extend to media exposures as well, from advertising injury to invasion of privacy. That's the use of pictures without the proper permissions. So as far as company inconveniences, this can include customer data as well as employee information, medical records, social security numbers, as well as corporate information such as financial information or blueprints if you're an architect or engineer, anything that has to do with confidential product design information. So these threats can as well as impact the business and reputation. So finally, looking at the information here on this page, it could be electronic or it can be in paper format. We've had examples of where, particularly with legacy documents, if you are a law firm or if you are a medical facility, there are pretty extended periods of time where you have to keep records on hand, and in many cases it could be 7 or 10 years or longer. And we have seen where people will have that information stored on an off-site facility, so that if that information is compromised, we can look to, from an insurance standpoint, we can look to include that as well as the electronic documentation. Clearly, the electronic documentation is where most of the information is going to be compromised. Thank you. What kind of expenses are you talking about? So here we show the immediate costs for your organization that may incur, including the notification costs, which is if you have a breach, you'll need to notify your customers, whether you do it by print or you may, in some cases, they'll have to notify the newspapers, depending on the type of exposure you have or the type of breach you have, and then obviously the mailing or transmission information. If you have a breach, you're probably not going to be able to email your customers because, one, they're not going to open up email from your business, and two, you're going to have to meet the regulatory requirements by actually physically mailing that information over to them. Looking at the public relations, the call centers, the credit monitoring, we've all received credit card updates where the information may have been compromised, and they issue you a new credit card and they offer you credit monitoring. It could be anywhere from 12 to 24 months, depending on the type of depending on the state that the information is impacted in. And again, there's the advertising and press release costs, part of that public relations. So the forensic expenses, the attorney costs will be pretty sizable. The cost of actually having a company come in to do the testing to make sure that the bleeding has stopped, that information isn't continuing to leak out, and then just the making sure that your systems are no longer vulnerable. So looking at the next slide, so the cost for a data breach. So you're looking at, the direct cost. Now, this is from the Ponemon Institute that has been doing a lot of work and research on cyber attacks and also on regulatory issues. So this is a bit dated, so you'll see some different information on the slides ahead, but just wanted to kind of give you a general cost per record. In this case, $189, but that includes the direct costs for the forensic that we just spoke about, the call center, the credit monitoring, the remediation work with the forensic that's going to need to be done with an outside firm, and then also the lawsuits that will come in, the regulatory fines, penalties, and fees, the reputational damage to a business, That's a little bit tougher to calculate because obviously if you're a victim of a breach, you may lose some customers and there could be some business interruption that's part of that. So the Ponemon Institute came up with a cost of about $189 on it from a breach standpoint. On the next slide. So what data is vulnerable? So in this case, you're looking at, you see that portable devices are the biggest cause here. 25% of the data is leaked because of portable devices. That could be your phone, it could be your laptop. If your laptop is encrypted, you're going to be in much better shape. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you notice that the third and fourth most vulnerable areas there, you'll see the malicious insider, that's obviously a rogue employee, and then negligence, that's usually employee negligence there. That adds up to 30% of the exposures. We see that as the leading cause for why information is compromised for a business. And it's something just to keep in mind that as secure as you think your information is, vulnerable is your weakest link. And sometimes, to no fault of their own, but employees will release information and, it will cost your business a significant amount of funds there. On the next slide, thank you. So we break out the initial cost for the business, and again, this is going through this breaks it out a little bit more detail as far as the response cost, the $15 to $20 per record for sending out the notifications, hiring a call center. Keep in mind that you're not going to be able to use your own employees to actually call your customers. You're going to have an accredited call center that's going to follow the regulatory requirements and make sure that the information is taken care of properly. The forensic cost. If anybody has ever had a penetration or test done of their business, you'll know that it's not an inexpensive proposition. And so you can imagine if they have to come in to do a forensic and make sure that the information hasn't been compromised, it's going to cost a little bit more. Legal costs, again, that is a big portion of this, particularly when you combine it with the regulatory problems. But $200,000 is not uncommon. We'll go through a couple of examples. And obviously for larger businesses, it can really amount into the millions of dollars there. One thing to keep in mind as far as the information here is that the sobering statistic is that 60% of small businesses that have a cyber breach are no longer in business after 6 months. It's just that critical and that much of an impact to businesses. So the incident response plan, what is this and why should you have one in place? As you see here, if you don't have one in place, you're playing with fire, but more importantly, maybe playing with fire from the regulatory agencies, which again we'll talk about a little bit more further down in the next few slides. But it's essential for the company to have it in place. If you have a breach, you want to make sure that you're following the protocol that you've established. This is important for a lot of reasons. Hopefully, you've put some thought into the process and you've tested it out. And if you are comfortable with that, then you want to make sure you follow that. I've been on some panels before with the attorneys that even advise clients that if you did things to the best of your ability, even if it turns out to be the wrong thing, if you had the plan in place and followed it through and stayed true to the plan, that the regulatory agencies will be much more lenient on you than if you just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and not knowing exactly what's going on. So incident response plan, typically who's part of that team is definitely going to be the senior management. Privacy officer, the IT, legal, public relations. Keep in mind that if you're a smaller business and you're not going to have all these positions, you may be a business of one person or you may be a business of 10 people. Whatever the situation is for your particular operation, you want to make sure that you have some guidelines in place. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but from a regulatory standpoint, these issues are not going away. We're seeing more and more where the regulatory agencies within a particular state are fighting amongst each other just to make sure that one is better or more strict than the other. And then the guidelines for getting third parties involved. Again, this depends on the type of business. If you're in the medical area and you have third parties you work with, you're going to make sure that you're going to have to keep the information private. There's what we refer to as business associate agreements that you may need to take a look at. All these things that your legal or counsel may be able to help you out with. And again, the notification process, the regulators, they're going to tell you what you need to do, and there's going to be information in there. So that's really what you want to look at from an incident response plan to make sure that you have that information properly on your as part of your plan. Okay, so recent loss trends, and the next couple of slides, we're going to go through some examples that we have in our agency been involved with. So in this particular matter, you can see that it's a small nonprofit organization was hit with ransomware that encrypted their system. We received a call from the owner who had just come back into town. So they called us up. Unfortunately, in this case, we had proposed coverage, but they didn't purchase it. So they just wanted to get our guidance on what they should do. So the first question I had for the client was, they're asking for, it was just under $3,000, and they wanted payable in Bitcoin, which obviously people don't have readily available. So we checked with their IT department, and unfortunately, as you can see in this case, that there were some issues with the backups, and it hadn't been properly restored or backed up for 5 months. And that was an easy answer for a client, and one that I didn't want to have to give them, but they were going to have to pay the ransomware. I really hope that they got the information back. So that was an ongoing situation. I don't have any end story for you on that one, but you can imagine that that's not a pretty situation. We had another situation where several employees noticed that they were in the water cooler talks on a Monday morning, and they all had the same issue when they filed with the IRS, saying that the IRS said that, you know, you can't process your return because you've already filed the return with the IRS. So because it happened to several employees, they got a little bit suspicious, so they did some investigative work. And in this case, what happened is that the HR person, their credentials to log into their payroll company was compromised. So once the hacker got that information, they were able to check and go through all the information for the employee records. And again, imagine the employee records include your spouse, your children, or anybody else in the household that may be covered by insurance through the company. So what may seem like one breach could turn into several different breaches. So that one ended up costing somewhere around $200,000 by the time you got legal costs, forensic costs, and then just to make sure that the employees were properly taken care of. The company was able to resolve that. But again, it was probably a 75 to 100 person operation, but still $200,000 was a pretty big impact to the bottom line. On the next slide, we'll just give you a few more examples, but the employee for a building company accidentally sends patient information out to the wrong email distribution list. We've all probably done this in one shape or another, where we reply to an email with reply all and attach something or say something, and then we wish we could get that back. And you know that if you hit the recall button, that means that everybody's really going to take a look at the email and not delete it as you had hoped or wished. In this particular situation, it was 10,000 patients were part of this medical building company. They sent the information out to everyone, which included all the patients as well as the internal distribution. So they had an Excel file attached to it that had all the patient records. So again, that was a pretty significant, as you can imagine, impact. That was something that we heard in the news. This particular situation is not one of our clients, so we don't have any specific details, but I know that it went on for a long period of time and cost significant dollars for that organization. As far as the customer service organization, it's hit with a virus that renders the computer system inoperable for almost a week. This is one of our, we had experienced this with one of our clients. The good news is that they determined that no customer data was lost, but what happened is that the operation, they couldn't operate for a week. Now, if you're a contractor, you can continue your operations and you're pretty much unimpeded, but if you're a medical building facility, you're going to be, or something along those lines, you're going to be down for an extended period of time. So going to the next slide for what we've mentioned before as far as regulatory issues. So you have state and federal regulations. So 48 of the 50 states have some type of regulation in place, and they're pretty specific to how you notify, what you put in your letter. I will tell you, New York is significantly different than California. So you may think that you're domiciled in the state of New York, so you don't have to worry about other states. It's not where your business resides. It's actually where your business is domiciled. It's where your customers reside. So if you're in New York and you have customers from Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, or even Canada, you're going to have to abide by the regulatory requirements of that particular jurisdiction. So that's where the costs really come in. For breach notification laws that commonly include the scope and nature of information covered by the law, the triggers for this, whether it be 1,000 records or 500 records, who need to be notified as far as the regulatory agencies. There's 3 different agencies in New York State that need to be notified, including the Attorney General. So there's, as you can see, that there's definitely some state impact that will impact your business. As far as most states, there's a race for who can come up with the most comprehensive regulatory compliance matters. You'll see that between the Attorney General and some of the other operations in New York State in particular. And most recently, in March of 2017, the New York State Department of Financial Services came up with implemented Regulation 500. Now, this impacts financial service operations, banks, insurance companies, and other financial advisors, but it's something that's a 2-year phase-in period, and by spring of 2019, those guidelines are going to extend to anybody doing business with any of these companies. So if you work for a bank, even if you're a contractor, you're going in there as an HVAC contractor, have access to their systems, you're going to need to be compliant with this. You'll hear a lot more over the next year. My guess is they're going to have to push back the deadline because the people are still trying to become compliant with the regulation that was implemented in 2017. So looking at some of the federal regulations on the next slide. So you have HIPAA, which everybody's pretty familiar with. That came out in 1996, so it's been around for over 20 years. Probably the first 15 years, no one really knew much about it, other than that you're signing documents when you went to the doctor or any other healthcare facility just to make sure that who's responsible, who has access to your information. So if you don't have that information properly documented and you share information that you shouldn't, if you have children or people under 18 or they turn 18, my kids went off to college, they turned 18, and I couldn't get any information on the medical records. I probably didn't want to know a whole lot about it, but nonetheless, it's that type of private information that HIPAA is requiring your business to follow. And then off of that, the HITECH Act, which is something that was implemented about 9 years ago. So that talks about the breach notification requirements, how many records are involved. This is where the business associate agreements came into play. So if you're a business that has relationships with other businesses, you have to make sure that you are in compliance with what that particular regulatory agency is requiring. And again, these things are widening, and we're seeing more and more regulations on a daily basis. So what does insurance do? What does the policy typically cover? There are generally two parts to the insurance policy. In insurance language, we refer to it as first party or third party. So on this particular slide, we're looking at what is considered first party. And first party is direct cost right out of your pocket almost on day one. So in this particular situation here, you're looking at pre-claims counsel. If you are working with an attorney, they will talk to you about referring to this as an incident as opposed to a breach. And from a terminology standpoint, it could make a difference. You always want to look at it as an incident because you don't know that it's a breach until you do the investigative work. That's where the forensic work comes in, forensic analysis. And the example I gave before, if you have an encrypted laptop, with most jurisdictions, if that laptop is proved to be encrypted, then you don't have to consider that a breach because the information is virtually impossible to get to. So again, notification expenses, crisis management, credit monitoring, all those things go into the first party costs. Fines and penalties, we talked about that as well. If you are a retail and you have payment card industry compliance you have to abide by, hopefully you're in compliance with that, but if there's any fines or fees that are imposed by the banks for payment card industry violations, the insurance policy can look to respond to that as well. In addition, the HIPAA, high-tech, state, and federal regulatory defense costs would certainly be covered under the policy. That could be, again, a state-specific issue. New York State is more restrictive on allowing insurance companies to pay fines or penalties, but the defense cost is something that could be picked up by these policies. At the bottom of the page, you talk about other first-party insurance. I really just want to focus more on business interruption. That is something that these policies have evolved into over the last couple of years. It wasn't something that we really thought about as an industry, so these forms are changing. Some companies change their forms 3 or 4 times a year because they're trying to keep up with this. But if you have a business and you have a fire and you have to relocate and incur additional costs, your property policy will probably pay for what they refer to as business interruption or business income and extra expense, but it doesn't translate to a cyber policy because that type of loss is excluded on a property policy. So we look to put that on our policy so that if you have that situation, the example we gave before, where a company is out of business, although private information wasn't released, there's nothing else going on other than they can't use their systems, that business interruption loss could be picked up under a cyber policy. Looking at the third-party exposures, and this is something that people are more familiar with, or it's more common to insurance, and that's the legal liability that's going to be imposed upon you. So if you have a regulatory agency coming down on you, or if you have a class action lawsuit or information along those lines where your customers are suing you because they have suffered a financial loss, that's going to be covered under the third-party liability. Same thing with the network security. That's where a virus emanates from your computer system and it infiltrates your customers, and they are coming after you because you spread the virus and you have to incur those costs. These policies can also extend to website media. They're even expanding now to cover just all media, whether it's electronic or not. But this includes defamation, copyright infringement, just not getting the proper permissions if you're using some type of information. We see this a lot with something as innocent as a daycare facility that wants to show pictures of the kids. They need to get those disclosures from the kids' parents before they do anything like that. And, so we've seen some situations where people are just not happy with that. Again, keeping in mind that people share a tremendous amount of information over the internet, but that's at their choosing. If it's because of a violation or a breach of your systems, they're not always as forgiving, I guess we could say that. So they're looking to try to get the money wherever they can in that particular situation. So on the next slide, I just wanted to take a look at our final scenario here where we're looking at the cost. And again, we've talked about this, so I won't go into great detail, but this is an actual example of a financial service firm. 5,000 records were breached, and Social Security numbers, account numbers, emails, names, and you can see the breakdown of the cost. Now, the biggest part was the regulatory fines and penalties in this particular situation, but you can see that the other half of the cost was broken down between the breach response costs, breach investigation costs, and then the legal defense and damages. So in this particular situation, it was a $300,000 loss, rounding it off the numbers, and it came down to about $60 per record. So as a man who's much smarter than I has said, and it takes 20 years to build a reputation, and unfortunately, if you have a cyber breach or any type of situation like this, you can have your business reputation could be ruined within 5 minutes. So keep in mind that it's always easier, and you want to be in a situation where you'd rather not use the insurance, but if you have a situation, you want to make sure that you at least had the proper incident response plan, and hopefully insurance is maybe a part of that. So I think we're going to see if there's any questions out there, and we'll open it up to any questions out there.
Thanks so much, Reggie. That was great content. If anybody on the line has any questions relative to disaster recovery, security solutions, wanting to set a security strategy, you can reach out to SMP directly, or if you want some more information on Cybersecurity Insurance, you can contact Lolly directly as well. Thanks so much for joining, and have a great day.